Hello, this is David Sandbeck, running for Congress in Minnesota's 4th Congressional District. There was just a statement from our incumbent representative, Betty McCollum, and she issued the statement today following the violence in Minneapolis last night in the wake of the death of Mr. George Floyd while in police custody. And I'd like to read that statement to you and briefly share some thoughts on the topic as well. Betty's statement reads as follows. The murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer and 3 other officers who stood by demands that the perpetrators be held fully accountable by our justice system and our society. The horrific video makes us all a witness to the brutality, cruel, and excessive treatment that caused Mr. Floyd's death. As Minnesotans, we must demand justice, and we must demand it in a manner that is strong and peaceful. Peaceful civil disobedience is the way our democracy helps ensure accountability. But Mr. Floyd's tragic death does not justify lawlessness. Violence, burning, and looting will not bring justice for George Floyd or for innocent neighbors whose lives and livelihoods have been destroyed. George Floyd died needlessly. His memory is best honored and respected by acts of kindness, humanity, and nonviolent civil action. We must stand united as Minnesotans against racism, inequality, and injustice. And even though there is anger, we must stand together peacefully. America will not reach its full potential until everyone is treated with equality, dignity, and respect. Now, of course, all of that, what's not to agree with? And what I think is missing is the acknowledgement that the looters and those that are burning down establishments and businesses that serve the community, those are not necessarily the same people as the protesters. Those are also voices of the unheard, but those are people that are not equivalent to the protesters. So there's 2 different groups here. There's the protesters, that's one group, and there's the rioters. And so the response we need is one that respects the protesters and a response that protects the community and treats the community with dignity and respect. So one of the ways we can do that, and our governor is already adding resources to address what's happening in Minneapolis, but those resources must not be armed. Those resources must be there to protect the community and to protect the protesters. And as far as the tools and the techniques to contain the type of disobedience that is so offensive to some people, is using non-lethal deterrence. What does that mean? So it can mean color, paintball type of technologies that are targeted specifically to those engaged in the disobedience that is violent. And then we would deal with them as we would any other violent crime. So the big difference between just indiscriminate shooting chemical weapons into crowds and moving the crowds out into the neighborhood, that was the wrong approach by the Minneapolis Police Department. That was a violent approach, and it was met with violence by those who would unfortunately escalate or respond to the escalation with further escalation. So we have to learn from our history. What did Herbert Hoover do to the protesters in Washington, D.C.? He dispatched the military to mistreat them and to kick them out. What did Franklin Delano Roosevelt do to protesters? He brought them soup. And so I say soup, not guns. And this is how I think a leader should approach this issue. Now, another thing I want to bring up is, this isn't a condonement of any type of violence, economic violence, or physical violence and destruction. Let's take a look and not be hypocrites about the economic violence that has been undertaken. And we can look at the CARE Act and the economic violence that is perpetrated in the sense of the theft and the looting that's taken place by the donor class that have received the benefit, the large portion of the benefit, the economic benefit of that act. And the rest of us did not get the bulk of the benefit. Let's take a look at Target, who has been targeted in the looting, and how Target has targeted their low-wage workers. And what I mean by that is they just settled some lawsuits recently where they misclassify, and that's my assessment, they misclassify workers who do the same type of work as their typical worker bees, their hourly workers, stocking shelves and the like, and they've misclassified them as managers so that they can get these managers working 50, 60, 70 hours a week and not pay them overtime. That is theft. That is wage theft. That is a different kind of extraction, of looting, and we need to acknowledge that too. That we're talking tens of millions of dollars targeting thousands of their workers. Okay, and so, and this goes on industry-wide in the retail sector. Target's not alone, but Target is absolutely guilty of this type of theft. And what bothers me is, of course, this type of looting that we see on TV is made for TV, and people get glued to that type of it's a spectacle. But there's no spectacle in Target settling some cases, so that doesn't get covered in the media, not so much. But we need to remember that there is also a corporate crime wave affecting this country. And as much as, these looters in the streets are offending so many people, why don't the looters in the suites offend the people? And we focus on treating others with equality, dignity, and respect. That's what Betty McCollum just spoke about. And, here in the state of Minnesota, we have some anti-wage theft legislation that went through, but that's not taking care of these misclassified workers, and they're breaking the law from the 1930s that secured a 40-hour work week and overtime pay. And so we're not treating workers with equality, dignity, and respect. And we're letting these big fat cats in these big corporations get away with looting working people every day. And so when I see these crocodile tears for Target, okay, they're crying out of one eye because they ignore the abuse that Target perpetrates on its low-income workers every day across this nation. And that's one example I'll give you, but there's thousands more. I'm David Sandbeck. Thank you for your time and attention.